Hey there, I'm Rami, and it's time to do a series swap. What is a series swap, I hear you say? Well, a series swap, as I'm using it to mean here, is where I take the characters from one series and put them into another, often swapping their species, backstory, and the main story, but trying to keep the characters themselves consistent to the originals. This series swap, I'm taking characters from Wings of Fire and putting them into Warrior Cats. Wait, actually, I'm drawing cats, so let's go with this form instead. For this one, I'm swapping the Dragonettes of Destiny and the Sandwing Princesses. My general guidelines for this was that I was going to keep their personalities and that I needed to keep the bones of the plot, but I was free to change and move around whatever else I wanted. With that established, let's start off with the Dragonettes. Clay, in Wings of Fire, is the Mudwing of the Prophecy Dragonettes. He can be described as a gentle giant of sorts, being sweet and earnest and perhaps a bit clueless sometimes, though he is fiercely loyal to his friends and is protective of them. For this series swap, Clay is a warrior of ThunderClan named Mudglow. I chose this name for him to both represent his original species and to demonstrate his warm heart and dependability. Mudglow grew up in ThunderClan with his siblings, which is a big difference from the original story. Now, for his design, I wanted him to be big, muscular, really steady looking, kind of grounded, planted, like he could take anything that threw his way. I also gave him these really big paws, these massive paws. He's described as having large paws in Wings of Fire. And I also made him long-haired and fluffy so that he had more of that strong look. For his posing, I wanted him to be still and unmoving, but strong and unmovable. I made his face sloped, sort of like a Sphinx cat's face, to represent the Mudwing's flat noses. For his coloring, I debated for a while between making him dark ginger to represent his flame-proof scales or chocolate to represent his mudwingness. I ended up going with the chocolate, but I made him redder than chocolate usually is to give him that amberish tone. For his tabby patterning, I gave him classic patterning because it looks like mud and it also kind of adds to his bulkiness. All right, and that's Clay. Tsunami is the Dragonette Seawing. She is a fierce, bold fighter and can be rather snarky and aggressive. She's also independent and bossy and can be somewhat rude at times. For this, she's a warrior of RiverClan, which was really quite the easy decision. Her name is Tidestorm, which was chosen to reflect her temperament and to sort of be a nod to her original name, and she's the daughter of RiverClan's leader. When designing her, I took a lot of inspiration from swimming and fishing cats, such as her small ears and small nose to prevent water getting in and damaging anything. I also gave her a shorter, more paddle-like tail for swimming, as well as wider feet for paddling, and I wanted to make her fur look really sleek and sort of glossy and waterproof. For the posing, I wanted to give it a lot of movement, a lot of direction, and I wanted to make it a little bit aggressive and very forward-moving. In her coloring, I wanted to make her a silver spotted tabby with dark gray. This gives her some good high contrast, and the spotting was meant to mimic Seawing's glowing markings. And the claw and swirl marks on her shoulder and haunch are meant to represent the royal patterning on the underside of her wings. That's Tsunami done. Alright, now, despite what the original prophecy says, instead of having a Skywing, the Dragonettes have Glory the Rainwing. I didn't actually draw Glory until after I'd done Starflight and Sunny, but I'll put her here to keep the order consistent with the book order. Glory is sarcastic and fierce, but she's also fair, intelligent, and confident. In this series swap, she's a loner. She's the protector of a group of loners and kitty pets who are being attacked and threatened by a trio of troublesome sisters, both in and out of the two-leg place. She's still named Glory, however, if she were to take a warrior name, I'd give her the name Viper Gleam, to reference both her color-changing scales and her venom. I decided not to put her in a clan to mirror the sort of otherness that haunts her, being perceived as not a real dragon out of destiny, and yet not fitting in with Rainwings either. For her design, I wanted her to feel graceful and elegant, very royal-like. So I gave her a more lithe figure and elegant-looking paws and very plush fur. If you watch my BrookClan series, I took a lot of inspiration from Ibis with her general shape language in the fur and the overall shapes. I still wanted to make her a little bit scruffy, though, because she's still fierce. She's still a fighter. The pose is meant to be very self-assured, steady, and a little bit stubborn, sort of like Clay's was, but more stubborn, like I said. I wanted her to be less expressive, showing how in Wings of Fire, she often doesn't let her emotions show on her scales like other Rainwings would. And for her patterning, I wanted to make her an unusual color, so that ended up with me making her a chocolate tortoiseshell Burmese point, sort of to represent her unusual and beautiful scales that are often mentioned and were displayed by Scarlet, and like Blaze wanted to like make some sort of clothing out of her scales, stuff like that. And that's Glory done. The Nightwing of the Dragonettes is Starflight. He's bookish and somewhat nervous. He's like the nerd character type of the five. He's also sensible and thoughtful, but tends to overthink at times. I made him a medicine cat of ShadowClan, and his name is now Nightspots. While technically Starflight could be a valid warrior name, especially since he's a med cat and there's not a chance for a star situation, the inclusion of Star made me change it. When designing him, I wanted to make him sort of lanky, a bit awkward, to add to a sort of nerdy, bookish look. I wanted to give him shaggier fur and ear tufts, partially because I think that's just a ShadowClan thing in my head, and also it makes him a little bit lankier, a little bit scruffier. I wanted to give him a little bit of movement in his pose, but it's very small, very cautious, restrained almost. And while he is just a black cat, because he's a Nightwing, of course he'd be a black cat, I gave him white speckling on his sides to represent the star patterning on the underside of Nightwing wings, and I gave him a little bit of freckling on his face because I thought it was cute and fun. And that's Starflight done. Rounding out the 5 Dragonettes is Sunny, a Sandwing Nightwing mix, though for a majority of the first 5 books, it is thought that she's just an odd Sandwing. She's sweet, kind, and often underestimated, being seen as the simple little sister of the Dragonettes. For this, she's Sunbreeze, a WindClan warrior. She was found alone as a kit by the clan and was taken in. Her father was a ShadowClan cat, and her mother is a loner who lost Sunbreeze when she was young. Design-wise, I wanted to give her very bubbly, bouncy, very round shape language. I wanted her to be cute and friendly, so I gave her fluffy fur, I gave her a bouncy, friendly-looking pose, and I made her a very happy face, lots of round and curves. For her patterning, I gave her golden fur, of course, to represent her golden scales. However, I did give her patches of gray tortoiseshell to represent her Nightwing heritage. For her stripes, I wanted them to read as sunbursts and rays of light to call back to her name, but I also wanted them to possibly be read as claw mark shapes, because she's not just this simple, sweet, like, not really a threat dragon. she's also, like, she can do stuff. She's capable. And in this, she's a warrior. Like, she's a feral cat. She's been trained to fight. And I wanted to show that. For shape language in the patterning, while her stripes are sharp, sunbursts, and light, I made her gray patches round, meant to evoke the moon rather than the sun and contrast with the stripes. And that's Sunny done. All right, with the dragonettes done, I also series swapped the 3 royal Sandwing sisters, Blister, Blaze, and Burn. For this series swap, all 3 sisters are rogues, who are the daughters of the leader of a large rogue group within the Two-Leg Place. Recently, she died, leaving a power vacuum within the Two-Leg Place, and each of the sisters is fighting to fill and take the most territory for themselves in this new power vacuum, as I said. Burn is the first of the 3 that we meet in the books, and she is described as the most brutal and violent of the sisters. She delights in war and fighting, and it's said she might even keep the war going just for fun if she becomes queen. As a cat, Burn is handling the power struggle by gathering followers through threats of violence, and by killing pretty much anyone who gets in her way. For her design, I wanted her to have a pose that was very moving, very active, sort of like Tsunamis, but turned up to 10. I wanted to make her very spiky, very unapproachable, very dangerous looking. So her fur is all over the place, she's got her mouth open, she's got these huge fangs. I also gave her plenty of scars, which is consistent with her dragon form, especially this scar under her arm, which was originally a burn as a dragon, but I just made it a scar. For her coloring, I made her fawn with a dark back and a light underbelly, which was meant to mimic sand and the color patterning of desert creatures like fennec foxes and such. Since black eyes wasn't an option, I ended up giving her dark amber eyes. And that's Burn done. The second of the sisters is Blister, who is the smartest of the 3. She's manipulative, clever, and often described as snake-like. In this series swap, her tactics for gaining power involve pitting her enemies against each other and outsmarting everyone else. She also makes promises based on what she thinks will sway certain cats, and always has backup plans for when things go wrong. Design-wise, I wanted to make her very snake-like, very viper-like. You can see that a lot in her pose. And I made the fur on her tail tip resemble a sandwing stinger, reflecting her venomous personality, as well as her original species. Her fur patterning was meant to imitate and call back to her black diamond markings as a sandwing, as well as rattlesnake patterns, which I'm realizing was probably the intention in the first place. I was originally going to give her dark green eyes, similar to how I gave Burn dark amber eyes, but I eventually decided on this piercing venomous yellow, because it sort of resembles her personality more. In general, I also just wanted to give her snake-like visual language, and I thought that fit more. And that's Blister done. The final sister, Blaze, was a bit harder for me to figure out story-wise. In Wings of Fire, Blaze is vapid and vain, concerned with little more than how she looks and how she's perceived. She's the very image of a spoiled princess, used to lavish finery and splendor. However, in this series swap, she is a feral cat, meant to be fighting for territory, which kind of clashes with this characterization. So, to compromise, I like to think that while she is still quite self-obsessed and vain, she uses her good looks and charms to convince others to do what she wants, such as fighting for her and protecting her. Though she can still fight, though she'd certainly lose to her sisters. Now, speaking of her looks, I wanted to make her very, very pretty. This meant long, elegant fur, a bit of a daintier face shape. I also gave her this fancy collar with 3 pearls on it, or at least I'd like to say those are pearls. They could be whatever. It's meant to stand in for the jewelry that she's said to wear in Wings of Fire, but she's not a kitty pet. You could say that she just found it somewhere and thought it looked nice. Her posing is meant to look graceful and a little bit vain, very self-centered, concerned with herself. I also made her tail tip fur look like a bit of a stinger, but it's definitely softer than I made Blister's. In fact, I made all three sisters' tails spiky at the end to sort of call back to that stinger. For her patterning, I made her tortoise shell, this sort of brindled pattern, as tortoise shells are very often seen as very pretty, very nice looking. And I added white to add a bit of interest, a little bit of more like gracefulness to her. And I made her eyes this very striking blue to contrast her sisters. And that's Blaze done. All right, that's everybody for now. I haven't actually thought about how the full story would play out for this series swap, so feel free to craft the story on your own. Also, if you have suggestions for future series swaps, or if you want to see more of this particular series swap, please leave suggestions below in the comments. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe, and join the Discord. If you'd like to support me, check out my Ko-Fi, which is linked below with the Discord. With that all said, it's time to go.